What's up guys, Intelitech Studios here, and this will be the review of the Bissell PowerGroom Bagless Upright Vacuum Cleaner. This one is model number 68C77. This particular unit can be acquired to this day at Big Lots. This particular model was manufactured in 2018. As you can see, it's model 68C77. It is a 12 amp vacuum cleaner, and this is the last consumer grade Bissell vacuum cleaner that you can buy with this legacy Bissell PowerForce Bagless style design. Now, this specific model and design is identical to the Bissell PowerForce Helix Turbo, which this is the model 68C71, not 77. You can see the vacuums are identical. There's only a couple minor little differences as far as the advertising. Obviously the colors are different, that's the most noticeable thing. I prefer the color scheme on the Bissell PowerGroom. There's also the fact that the Helix Turbo does in fact have a turbo brush, whereas the PowerGroom Bagless doesn't. Instead, well, I was going to show the corner tool that this machine comes with, but unfortunately it appears that I have misplaced it, as Bissell does not give you a spot to store it on the machine, which is interesting because the Helix Turbo has a spot for the turbo brush, when Bissell easily could have just added a bracket here that would allow you to stick it on the front of the handle like the newer PowerForce Helix Turbo does. So Bissell very well could have done that. They decided not to, and as a result I have lost that attachment. But for what it's worth, whenever I did have the attachment, and I know I still have it, I just don't know where it is, it did work pretty decently. It seemed kind of redundant because the crevice tool does still do corner work just fine, but that little tool was kind of nice because it had felt strips on it, so it was a little bit softer than a crevice tool, and it was kind of a little bit easier to get into corners because you could just put it straight into a corner and it would clean both sides of the angle of the corner, which was really nice. So I do really like that attachment, and it is really nice that this machine comes with it because I don't believe it comes with any other Bissell. So that is really nice, that little attachment that it does come with, even though it would have been nicer if it did ride on board. I did try to check to see if it would fit on this back peg. It does not. I also tried to see that if I turn the crevice tool around, could I stick it on the top of the crevice tool? And the answer is no, that doesn't work either. So there is no real way to store it on board unless you happen to have a roll of duct tape. So, comparing these two machines, besides the color and the little turbo brush attachment difference, the machines are identical. So if you get your hands on one of these machines, it's identical to this. There really is no substantial difference. Since I forgot to show this sticker in the video when I got it, that's what it looks like. This one was manufactured in 2013, and this one in particular is 10 amps, although whenever this model first came out, I believe they were 12 amps like this one is. This one is in fact a 12 amp motor, even though it doesn't advertise it, which is interesting. This is, I believe, the last Bissell vacuum that you can buy in general with a 12 amp motor. So that is very interesting. It doesn't really have any sort of headlight or anything to justify it, but it does indeed have a 12 amp motor. So that is pretty interesting. It sounds pretty much identical to the older PowerForce 12 amp motors. If you ever had a Bissell, if you ever had a 6585, if you had one of those machines, like the newer style PowerForce Bagless Turbo before it turned into the Helix, the motor sounds identical to that. So if you know what that sounds like, then you know what this sounds like. So beyond that, it's pretty much identical as to an older PowerForce Helix Turbo, which means that the agitation on it is pretty good. It's got 5 height adjustments, it has a HEPA media filter, but it's not a sealed system, so this HEPA filter is nice to have. It does mean that the filtration, at least from the HEPA filter exhaust itself, will be better than the newer machines in the PowerForce lineup. It does mean that this is a non-sealed system, and a lot of dust will escape around the seals of these dirt containers. A lot of dust will get blown into the back housing behind the dirt container. You can even see there's a little bit of dust there already after using this only once to clean my house. And you can also see that this filter has a 3-layer filter, just like this machine does. And it also has a pre-motor filter that goes in before the filter, and I actually have this doubled up. I have 2 of these in here. And it also has the upper tank and louver assembly, which is just the tiny little cyclone. Again, that's identical to this one, just a different color. You can see this one has been used more heavily, so this one's gone cloudy. This one is still pretty clear, so it does still look very presentable and very new looking. And I greatly prefer this pale blue color scheme to the red, so I like the PowerGroom more just from that aspect alone. One thing I will say though is that if you're trying to decide between this and the newer style Helix Turbo or a similar machine to it, for pets, I would get this because this little filter a lot of times will trap pet hair. This little outer filter will trap pet hair, and it is an absolute nightmare to clean pet hair off this filter. It is very, very difficult to wash pet hair out of this filter, at least especially out of this most outer layer. This inner layer isn't too bad, and the filter itself isn't too bad, but this filter in general is a lot more of a pain to clean than the one that's inside the cyclone assembly of the newer Helix. So if you are worried about that, about actually having issues with cleaning the filter, especially if you have pets, then I might not recommend this machine as highly as I would another machine in Bissell's lineup, like the CleanView or PowerForce Helix Turbo, like right there. So has an easy empty dirt container, again, identical to the Helix, to the first gen Helix models. For some reason, the fill line is all the way down here. I don't know why it is. Obviously, you can fill it up towards the top of this, and you could fill it up higher. It's just you would end up spilling out some dirt when you pull out the container. But still, I would generally recommend try to empty this pretty much after every use. It doesn't hurt to do so. Whereas with these ones, you can kind of let them fill up, and it's not really going to hurt it as much. It's kind of funny how this says never loses suction when that's obviously not true. These filters do clog up pretty frequently, and granted, the machine will often keep suction even while this filter is clogged for quite a while, but eventually it is going to start losing suction. Whereas these machines are actually a lot more resilient to losing suction, as are the bagged units, whereas this sort of filter setup is not the best for maintaining any sort of continuous performance, especially if you're sucking up a lot of fine dust. A lot of that will get stuck in these filters, and worst case scenario, a lot of times that stuff will go through the motor and get clogged in this HEPA filter, or in some cases, just blow all out of the machine and coat the machine in dust after extended periods of use. That is one thing, is that the newer machines are a lot more resilient. Their filter setup is a lot more foolproof compared to these older units, and obviously this machine that's based off legacy platforms. So filtration on this machine is not a strong suit, but this machine currently on Big Lots' website retails for $90, which I think is kind of weird considering that the Helix Turbo that it replaced retailed for about $70 to $80. So I kind of find that weird how this actually costs more despite the fact that it's the exact same design as this machine. I find that to be kind of bizarre. But one thing that's nice about Big Lots is that they frequently have sales in a lot of their departments. They're kind of similar to CVS, where a lot of their stuff is a little bit overpriced, but then they'll have really good deals where the prices are then really, really good. So I actually managed to get this machine brand new for about $62 after taxes, around $65, with a 30% off sale. So that was really nice, and I think that that is a decent price for it. $62 to $70 is a decent price for this. Anything more, I think, is asking too much for this machine. At least in terms of like, yeah, I would say like it's worth it, but at that point you have other machines that are on the market that would be better, even within Bissell's lineup. Because this machine for a while was only $60. Nowadays it's like $70, and for the price of this, you can get the rewind variant of this for about the same price. But if you're a collector and for some reason you want to have this older style, one thing I will say is the build quality of this does appear to be a little bit nicer than those newer units. I don't think it's enough of a difference to really pick this over this machine in a lot of scenarios, but if that is a very important thing for you, then that's a good point towards this machine. Has a 30-foot cord, so that's really nice. Has actually a bit of a longer cord. Or did I say 30 feet? I meant 25-foot cord. So it's about the same as this. At least I believe it's a 25-foot cord. I thought it was. If it's wrong, I'll update the description. Of course, you do have the combo tool. Classic Bissell combo tool that you've had for generations at this point. So if you don't want to have just a dusting brush and you want an actual upholstery tool, this is a good option. Trying to do this with one hand is annoying. There we go. You also have the exact same size crevice tool as the Helix Turbo. You got this tiny little crevice tool. It's the exact same size, although it's black instead of gray. Not that that really makes a difference. But the extension wand is a lot longer. So that is one thing, is that if you care about having above floor reach, this machine, this extension wand, is much longer than the one on the Helix Turbo. The one on the Helix Turbo is about 2/3 the size of this extension wand. So, granted, you could buy a second extension wand and add it to the hose, and especially on the Helix Turbo, it'll stretch out enough to where you can keep an extension wand on it, and it's not going to make the hose look weird. So that is at least a workaround. If you want to do that, just order another one of those extension wands and leave it attached to the hose. So then at that point, the hose will be like right around here on the vacuum, and of course you can adjust this hose accordingly. This machine will kind of kink the hose up a little bit, but in the case of the Helix Turbo, that will adjust the hose accordingly, and it will be about as kind of compressed as this one is instead of being all stretched out. This hose is a lot nicer than on the Helix Turbo, but the difference is pretty negligible. So, you know, it's not too big of a deal, but it is an area where I believe that this does have a better hose than the Helix Turbo. It's also a little bit thicker, more resilient to clogs, but otherwise they're pretty much identical. They are in fact interchangeable. So that is one thing. Actually, wait a minute, is this one interchangeable? Yes, this one is also interchangeable. So that's kind of nice. And beyond that, there's not really much else there is to say about it. It's pretty common, you know, as far as the design. It's just kind of the last machine that you can get with this design. So, you know, there's not really much else to say about it other than we'll just go ahead and give it a quick run. Alrighty, it's all plugged in, so we'll go ahead and run this real quick. Did I seal this up? Yes, I did. One thing I will say about this machine is that on my sample at least, the brush roll is extremely aggressive. I mean, Bissell brush rolls are known for being a little bit aggressive, but this one in particular is very aggressive. So if your machine ends up like mine, then you do not want to leave it sitting in any patch of carpet, even more than you would for one of these machines, because this will burn through your carpet. So there was one point when I was using this and I burned a pretty significant spot in my carpet. Thankfully, after about, like, you know, a couple days of vacuuming with other machines and pulling that pile back up, I was able to restore that patch, and now I can't even tell where it was. But still, that is one thing to keep in mind, is that, at least in the case of my unit, the brush roll is really overly aggressive. So if you're using this, if you want to get a vacuum in like an area of, like, for example, if you're installing carpet and you want a machine that's going to be overly aggressive because you want to pull out all the dead carpet fibers and stuff like that, I don't know if that's actually an application that would make sense, because I don't know if you'd want to do that with new carpet. Well, either way, if there's something like that where you really don't mind it tearing up the carpet a little bit, then yeah, that'd be a good choice. But otherwise, I would be a little bit worried about this tearing up your carpet. Although that's generally with any cheap upright. Any cheap upright is going to have an overly aggressive brush roll. And normally that's a good thing, because it means you're pulling out all the dirt and stuff out of the carpet, and as well as the loose carpet fibers that, you know, were just sitting on the top of the carpet anyways and were already unattached. But if you leave in a certain spot, you could end up damaging your carpet, so just be careful with that. In my case, I do have a replacement brush roll that I will install into this at some point. So, because I called Bissell about that, because as a result of the brush roll being very aggressive, the entire machine rattles a little bit and kind of vibrates. So I contacted Bissell regarding that, and they sent me a new brush roll under warranty. Normally they don't do that, however, so don't count on them doing that. If yours has a bad brush roll, at that point you might just want to return it. I was unable to return my machine because I bought it right whenever the COVID-19 crisis started ramping up and Big Lots was not allowing returns. So because of that, Bissell did make an exception and send me a new brush roll, but that is not the norm. So just keep that in mind. This thing does have a very aggressive brush roll. I mean, it is called the Bissell PowerGroom, so because of that, it does groom very, 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 very well. That is definitely not false advertising on that front. It does groom the carpet very well, but it may arguably groom the carpet a little bit too much depending on your application that you would need a vacuum for. However, the airflow is still really good. It cleans very good, and while the filtration is not a strong suit, you're not really expecting that with a budget bagless machine anyways. If you want better filtration in this price range, get a bagged machine with some HEPA bags, and you're going to be a lot better off in that regard if you are concerned about filtration and about pet hair, because you can't really, pet hair can clog a bag, but you can just throw the bag out instead of having to worry about washing a filter that's going to trap pet hair very badly. Because a lot of times when you vacuum up stuff, it will get sucked into here and go straight into the filters and completely fill the filter up with junk. So keep that in mind. That is not a very good aspect of this machine. But if you are prepared to keep up with filter maintenance or using it in an application where getting a lot of fine dust clogging the filters isn't going to be as big of a hassle, then that's an area where I would recommend this. So just there are a few caveats in this, and I think there are more caveats for the average consumer than what it would be for the current lineup of Bissell's PowerForce and CleanView series. So that's why I'm hesitant to recommend this. There's also rumors right now that Big Lots and Bissell are discontinuing this machine. I've had some friends tell me that their stores have had this out of stock. My personal local Big Lots store does still have stock of these, but it's unclear whether or not that will continue into the future. This machine has been on the market for a few years now, so it is entirely possible that since this is the last consumer-grade machine with this design, that it may get axed pretty soon. So if you are a collector, or if for some reason you just really want this machine, I would act sooner rather than later. And if the $90 isn't worth it to you, then I guess just hope it goes on sale before it gets discontinued. Or maybe there was just some stock issues and maybe it will still run for a few more years. That remains to be seen. But either way, just keep that in mind. If you are wanting this, I would bite the bullet now before it gets harder to find these. Because obviously this is not a very common machine, since it only sold in pretty much one store. So if you are a collector and you want something more collectible than a standard Helix Turbo, this is probably your machine. And you might want to get it sooner rather than later, especially if you like this blue color like I really do. So I'm glad that I got it when I did, and because I have this, I will be selling the Helix Turbo because it's very superfluous and I prefer the color scheme of this. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. This is the review of the Bissell PowerGroom Bagless Model 68C77, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And hopefully, if you have one of these vacuums, or if you have the similar Helix Turbo as mentioned before, let me know how that goes and how you enjoy that machine. And I'll see you guys in the next video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And this is Intelitech Studios signing out. Have a good one.